Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. You know, growing up, my fraternal grandfather, we called him Papa Newton. He was a retired coal miner, spent his entire life working in the coal mines. And after he retired, he wanted to try his hand at farming. Now, he didn't have a big farm, but what he had, he took very good care of. And I remember making the trip from Fort Smith, Arkansas to just outside of Greenwood, Arkansas to a little community called Washburn, where my grandfather and my grandmother lived. Now, one of his amazing things that he loved to do was to tend to his garden. Now, his garden was a pretty good sized field because he grew tomatoes, he grew okra, he grew carrots, he grew potatoes, he grew sweet peas, just about anything and everything you could think of you could grow in Arkansas somehow found his way into this massive field that he'd turned into a garden. Now, my grandfather was old school, and so when it came to plowing the field, he had an old mule named Bessie. And Bessie was the power to the plow until Bessie passed away. And I remember as a young boy making the trip from Fort Smith, Arkansas to just outside of Greenwood, Arkansas to a little community called Washburn, where my grandfather and grandmother lived. I watched in fascination every spring as my grandfather would dig these deep, straight furrows, row after row, into this field that he had mapped out to be his massive garden. And I watched him as he guided Bessie up and down that field. He put his hand to the plow, he focused on his effort, and very carefully, very meticulously, every single spring, he prepared that field for planting. Well, I remember watching that for years and wondering time and again, I wonder if I could do that. Well, as a young preteen, I got my chance. One day, I'm watching my grandfather out in the field as he's working, and he looked at me and he kind of waved me over to the fence and he said, "Son, it's time you learn how to till a garden." And he helped me over the fence. And after a few minutes of instruction, he put the strap over my shoulder. He placed the reins of the mule in my hand. He pointed me in the direction I was to go. And I put my hands to the plow. I gave Bessie the command to start, and down the field we went. Well, you can probably guess what happened as a young preteen, his first time behind an old school plow. I can tell you my grandfather followed behind me laughing all the way while Bessie and I cut a, well, let's just call it a not so straight path across the field. Now the plow was bouncing up and down as I struggled to keep that blade deep enough in the dirt to actually till the soil. Now Bessie plodded along, dragging the plow and for the most part dragging me behind her as she did her part as I wrestled to keep that plow upright and keep that blade in the ground and did my very best to make Papa Newton proud. Well, I got to the fence line and brought the mule to a stop, and I turned around to look at my handiwork, thinking I was going to get a pat on the back and an attaboy from my grandpa. He was laughing, and he was smiling, and he was almost doubled over in laughter. Well, let's just say when I turned around, there wasn't a furrow that you'd probably want to measure with a ruler or a straight line or a yardstick or any other straight instrument whatsoever. And definitely not the picture of the handiwork you'd want to put on the internet as a model of what a straight furrow should look like as you're properly tilling a garden. I can tell you my row was more diagonal than horizontal, and in some places it looked like a lightning bolt, up and down and back and forth, some areas deeply furrowed, others barely scratching the dirt. Now, when my grandfather finally caught his breath, he helped me turn Bessie around for the return trip because it wasn't just enough to do it once. My grandpa insisted that you do it till you got it right. But after he turned me around and got Bessie lined up and got me reattached back into the harness and ready to move down the field, he put his hand on me, he looked me deeply in the eyes, and he said something I'll never forget. He said, "Son, you've got to keep your hand on the plow and you got to keep your eye on the prize." And I looked at him kind of funny and I said, "Eye on the prize?" And he held his finger up and he said, "Wait just a minute." And so my grandfather walked the end of that long field to the other end of the pasture, and he picked up a large rock along the way that the dirt had brought up with the plow, and he picked that large rock up and he set it on a fence post. My grandfather then shouted across the field, he says, "I want you to move Bessie across the field towards this large rock," as he pointed to it with his finger. He said, "I don't want you to take your eyes off that rock, and that's where you and Bessie are going to go. He also told me to put my hands on the plow and make sure that I maintain constant downward pressure, but whatever I did, don't take my eyes off the rock. Now, that rock in that moment was my prize. So again, I gave Bessie the command and down the field we went. This time, as instructed, I kept my eyes focused on that deep rock. I kept my hands firmly on the plow, slowly pushing down as we moved forward, slowly plodding down the field as Bessie did her part to get me from point A to point B. Now, when we got to the end of the field, I gave Bessie the command to stop, and I felt Grandpa come up, and this time he wasn't laughing. He was smiling. And even before I turned around, I knew he was pleased with my effort. And as I turned to look, behind was a deep, mostly straight, I say mostly straight furrow that had been cut in the deep, rich, dark earth. Again, my grandfather smiled, patted me on the shoulder again, and he looked me back in the eyes, and he reminded me of something that I've never forgotten to this day. He said, "Son, it doesn't matter what you do in life. Two things are going to always remain true. You got to keep your hand on the plow, and you've got to keep your eye on the prize." You know, I've never forgotten that statement, and that's where I want to lean into today. But interestingly enough, I found out years later that this phrase, hand on the plow, eye on the prize, had its origins in the American Civil Rights Movement. Now, if we go back to the early African American spirituals that were part of their worship when the African Americans first came to the United States, there was a song they used to sing called "Keep Your Hand to the Plow." Now, that song was a reference to a quote from the book of Luke, and it was a biblical quote about keeping your hand on the plow and not looking back. In fact, the quote from the Bible says this, and it's Jesus speaking in this quote, and he says, "No one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God." So Jesus' message to his followers was really simple. Don't get distracted. Don't give up. Remain dedicated to the work at hand. Now, this passage of scripture was the impetus for the adaptation of this African American spiritual, "Keep your hand to the plow," during the Civil Rights Movement, and the words were changed to "Keep your eyes on the prize." Now, this phrase went on to become a very powerful symbol of perseverance and determination and led that movement to greatness. Now, the phrase "keep your eye on the prize" is still used today to encourage individuals just like you and me to maintain our focus on our goals, even in the midst of difficult circumstances. It's a reminder to zero in on what really matters with perseverance and determination, keeping our eye on the prize. Now, I want you to think about it this way. The more you welcome your future, the closer your future is going to get to you. Because when your eye is on the prize, you're either giving yourself permission to go get it, or you're giving it permission, that prize, to come to you. Now think about what I just said. When your eye is on the prize, you've either given yourself permission to go get that prize, or you've given that prize permission to come directly to you. Now, it's easy to give up on your prize when it appears to be far, far away. In fact, so far away, it seems unattainable. But it's in those moments that doubt and fear and discouragement and depression can begin to overwhelm our thoughts and cause us to want to either settle for less or give up early. So when we see the prize far, far away in the distance, because remember, our future is always before us. But when we see our prize in the distance, and at times we wonder if it's attainable, we've got to remind ourselves of the ancient wisdom of Lao Tzu. He famously said, "The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." Now think about it. When we start any journey, whether it's getting out of bed in the morning to walk across the room to turn on the lights, or it's starting a journey of 1,000 miles, our future starts in the distance. It's always from where we are to where we want to be. The distance in between is the journey we have to travel. Now, Lao Tzu's timeless wisdom reminds us that you and I have got to be willing to go the distance in order to reach our future destiny. If we're unwilling to go the distance, then our prize is going to remain unclaimed, at least by us. Now, one of the things I admire about Lao Tzu's teachings, and the fact that I say they're timeless, his teachings have so permeated our culture that today we see that theme, the journey of 1,000 miles, playing out in music, in plays, in television, and even on the big screen. I mean, think about the movie The Wizard of Oz. Now, Dorothy's transported from Kansas to somewhere over the rainbow, and she first meets the Munchkins. Well, after they see and hear her dilemma, what do? They instruct her to go to the Emerald City to seek the guidance and counsel of the powerful Wizard of Oz. That becomes her prize, to get to the Emerald City, to seek the guidance and the counsel of the wizard to be able to find a way back to Kansas. And even along the way, as she meets the Scarecrow, as she meets the Tin Man, as she meets the Cowardly Lion, and she interacts the Wicked Witch and all of her forces trying to stop her from getting to where she wants to go, she continually keeps her eye on the prize. And despite the adversity, despite the setbacks, despite all the problems she had, Dorothy finally finds a way to get to the Emerald City, to reach the prize that she so desired, and ultimately, by clicking her ruby slippers, we know from the end of the movie, she found her way back home, because remember, there's no place like home. All through that movie, Dorothy kept her eye on the prize. Now, let's also not forget the movie Rocky, one of my favorite movies of the 1970s. Now, Rocky was a small-time boxer turned mob enforcer, his name Rocky Balboa in the movies. Now, this small-time boxer, kind of a local hero, gets the opportunity of a lifetime. There is a random drawing for an individual to have an opportunity to fight the world champion, Apollo Creed, in a boxing match in the ring in Philadelphia. Now, this 1976 blockbuster movie is really the quintessential story of the underdog who gets the opportunity and sets his eye on the prize to become a world champion. And in the process, he overcomes incredible odds to have the opportunity to do battle with Apollo Creed in the ring. Now, another movie I'll mention along these same lines would be The Shawshank Redemption. In that movie, we see Andy Dufresne, his unwavering hope, his meticulous planning, spanning decades in the process, is another brilliant example in film of an individual who kept his hand on the plow and his eyes on the prize. Despite all of the humiliation, all the pain and discomfort, and all of the abuse that he suffered in that prison, and despite the overwhelming odds, Andy ultimately triumphed over adversity. He found a way out of his cell, and in doing so, he also exposed the corruption of a prison system that had held him captive for decades. But the examples of individuals who put their hand to that plow and their eyes to the prize aren't just in the movies. We see examples of those also in real life. Let me share a few I think really tell the story of what it means to put your eye on the prize and the results that can happen when you stay focused and you persevere until you succeed. Rudy Ruettiger, you probably know the name from the movie Rudy, but it's a true story of a young man whose lifelong dream was to play football at Notre Dame. Now, he was told that he was too small and he wasn't good enough, and that dream was never going to become a reality in his life. But Rudy had a vision of the future, and he held that vision because he knew what he wanted. He set his eye on the prize, he put his hand to the plow, and he did what was necessary, proving to himself and all of his doubters that he was capable of taking to the field as one of the Fighting Irish. It's an incredible movie if you haven't seen it, but it's based on a true story. Now, let me tell you about another individual I met last year that is another excellent example of eye on the prize, and that's Shantae Lowe. Now, Shantae Lowe, if you don't know the name, she is a four-time Olympian competitor. Now, think about that. Making the Olympic team once is a big deal, but making the Olympic team 4 years in a row and winning an Olympic medal in the process, definitely a prize worth talking about. Now, Shantae's destiny started early on, and it was revealed to her in her childhood as she was watching the Olympics with her grandmother. And she asked the question, "Grandmother, can I do that?" And it was through the encouragement of a grandmother that she went on through perseverance and dedication to not only qualify 4 times for 4 specific Olympics. That's a 16-year period of training. And she also won a bronze medal in the high jump. at the 2008 Beijing Olympics. Shantae put her hand to the plow, her eye on the prize, and she kept jumping higher and higher. Now, another name you probably know is that of President Bill Clinton. And what you may not know is that as a young man, President Bill Clinton admired at that time President John F. Kennedy. And in 1963, Bill Clinton, representing the state of Arkansas as one of two delegates to go to the National Boys Conference, had an opportunity to meet his teenage idol in person. This chance encounter and a brief handshake so moved young Bill Clinton, who was vacillating on what he wanted to do with his life, that after that handshake and the events that followed inspired Bill Clinton to pursue a life of public service. He became the 42nd president of the United States, and that's after serving one term as Attorney General and 2 terms as governor of Arkansas. Bill Clinton set his eye on the prize, the presidency of the United States, and he never looked back. In fact, I've talked to several people here in the Hot Springs area where I live that went to school with Bill Clinton. And they remember during school, they were asked one day in class, would you stand up and introduce yourself at the beginning of the year and tell me what you want to do when you grow up? Bill Clinton stood up in front of the class after that experience in meeting John F. Kennedy. He stood up and he said, my name is Bill Clinton and I will be president of the United States. His eye was on the prize and he kept his hand on the plow until he achieved that ultimate destiny for him. Now, I can speak to this to a small degree myself because my journey to become an LA Tribune best-selling author was a 1,000-mile journey that started in my youth. Now, all the way back in elementary school, I had a teacher that discovered I had a passion for writing. And she encouraged my love of writing and allowed me not only to write, but to also direct 3 or 4 short plays that I had the opportunity to perform with some of my classmates for the entire elementary school. Now, another teacher later on in junior high and in high school encouraged me to expand beyond writing plays into doing short stories and later on into novels. In my early 20s, I had an opportunity to spend some time with Malcolm McGregor, the Christian CPA on the 700 Club. After spending some time with him and talking about his journey and what he did, as Malcolm was getting ready to go back home to California, he challenged me to write my first book. As he got ready to leave, he turned and he looked me in the eye and he said, John, what are you going to do with the gift that God's given you? Now, I was 23 years old and I shrugged my shoulders and I looked back and I said, Malcolm, I'm 23 years old. I don't know what I'm going to do with this gift. Well, Malcolm's reply literally changed the trajectory of my life. Malcolm looked down with me and he put a hand on my shoulder and in a very stern, almost commanding voice, he said these words, write a book. I did. It can change the world. That statement, write a book, it did. It can change the world. That so stuck with me that for the next 3 days, I couldn't sleep. So after 3 days of not sleeping, I drove to Little Rock, Arkansas. I bought a computer I didn't know how to use to write a book I didn't know how to write. And after I finished that manuscript, dollars and cents, I had the opportunity to share that with a publisher. The publisher was tied to Christian Life School of Theology. At that time, I think it was called Beacon University. But regardless of the parameters of the name of the theological seminary, the book was accepted. It became required reading in their Divine Disciplines of Finance class. That book, Dollars and Cents, A Kingdom Perspective on Money, has gone at last count that I have. Now in its 4th edition, that book has gone into more than 25 countries around the globe, literally allowed me to touch the world and never really leaving Arkansas to do so. Now, today I'm the author of 10 books and counting, and I've had several #1 new releases on Amazon, and my book, Black Belt Leadership 101, that was released in the year April 2000, has been recognized as bestseller status by the LA Tribune in September of 2024. So when it comes to keeping your eye on the prize, perseverance and dedication are important. But there's 2 other elements that are also important I want to briefly touch on as I begin to move towards wrapping up this week's podcast. In addition to perseverance and determination, faith and hope also play a pivotal role. In fact, not only a pivotal role, but to me, an integral role. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things not yet seen. And I think about that. Faith is the substance of things we hope for, but the evidence of things not yet seen. We know the prize is out there. We know it's waiting for us to come to it, or we're waiting for it to come to us. But either way, if we know it's out there, we're moving towards it one step at a time. So faith allows us to hold on to that image of success, to see that prize, to see that destiny place that we want to go to in the future, to recognize the success we want to experience, even when that prize seems the proverbial 1,000 miles away. Now, once faith is in place and we can see the success that we want to experience, hope then allows us to make plans to achieve that vision of success. Because when faith and hope come together, we can start to envision not only achieving success, but we start to see the steps that are necessary to get us from where we are to where we want to be, and the skills we've got to develop along the way. So when we get there, we're prepared to not only see the future, but seize the future. Faith and hope together allows us to take decisive action, even as we're keeping our eyes on the prize. And you don't believe me? Ask Shantae Lowe, ask Rudy Rudiger, ask Bill Clinton. Even better, ask Albert Einstein, ask Thomas Edison, ask Henry Ford, ask Madame Curie, ask Jonas Salk, ask Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, or any of the other great inventors of the 20th century. They're all going to tell you the very same thing. Faith and hope can help us see from a distance, even when we can't clearly see over the horizon. So keeping your hand on the plow emphasizes diligence, perseverance, and an unwavering focus to the task at hand. Keeping your eye on the plow is a willingness to wholeheartedly commit to the work that is required of you to achieve success without allowing distractions or difficulty to deter you. It's about staying faithful to the task at hand, even when the results aren't immediately apparent. It's about doing the work necessary to get you from where you are to where you want to be. That's what it means to keep your hand on the plow. Now, what does it mean to keep your eye on the prize? Keeping your eye on the prize highlights the importance of maintaining a clear vision of your ultimate goal. It's holding that image of success and holding that destiny image even through difficult and challenging times, or in those times that we experience those inevitable setbacks that are going to happen along the way. By focusing on what success looks like and what it looks like to you, you're better able to prioritize your efforts and not become distracted or deterred by the little things that happen along the way. Keeping your eye on the prize is about having a crisp, clear image of your future. It's about staying motivated, and it's about remaining committed to the ultimate outcome that you desire most. It's about zeroing in on what really matters. Now, in the words of my grandpa Newton, I want to again revisit those because they're just as relevant today as they were when I was in the field as a young teenage boy. These words still apply to me, and they still apply to you. It doesn't matter what you do in life. Two things will remain true. You got to keep your hand on the plow, and you've got to keep your eye on the prize. Now, I want to give you that quote again, and if you haven't written it down, I encourage you to write it down. Maybe it's one of those aha moments that you put on a sticky note and you stick it on the bathroom mirror. Let me give it to you again. It doesn't matter what you do in life. Two things will always remain true. You've got to keep your hand on the plow, and you've got to keep your eye on the prize. Remember, the more you welcome your future, the closer your future gets to you. Now, your future always starts in the distance, and you got to be willing to go the distance to get to your destiny. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So put your hand on the plow, put your eye on the prize, begin, and continue. I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.